5701 Bancroft Avenue in Alto, Michigan, in a nice home on a farm here. Nick and I have come. I'm Ivan Blau, and this is my grandson, Nick. And we are going to do a little interview here with Dr. Siegle and Mrs. Siegle. And this is actually a military oral history, and it's part of the military oral history project of the Lowell Area Historical Museum, and it will be put in their files. And it's also not only in the files of the Lowell Area Historical Museum, but it's going to be put in the file of the Michigan Oral Histories Project, and that is also affiliated with the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. So you'll be well documented after this, and we're so glad that you have taken, and we're very honored that you would take the time to sit with us and interview this with us. So now we'll also ask Mrs. Siegle to sit in on this interview, because we know that behind every successful and good person in our community, there is a good lady behind them. And I found that very often to be true. And she's certainly been a faithful wife and a partner for you for almost 65 years. That's going to be soon, 55. Okay. So anytime, Mrs. Siegle, that you think of something, well, you just chime right in and put your 2 cents worth, and don't let him do all the talking, okay? That'll be just fine. So, I think to get our interview started here and get going, we'll talk about a little bit. I'd like to know a background of where your family came from, the roots of your family, kind of the situations of your family in the old country, and just take her from there and give me a little background. Okay, Doctor?
All right. Well, I was a product of William and Mary Siegle of Boston, Massachusetts.
Okay.
My father's family immigrated in about 1868 from Russia. At that time, my grandfather was not married. He was asked to serve in the Tsar's army, which he didn't want to do, so his family decided that as long as he wanted to come to America, he had to be married. So he married his niece.
His niece?
His niece.
Oh, it's not about it. Pretty good. She must have been almost his age then, huh?
Pretty near.
I see.
I don't think there was much age difference. That's on my father's side. They came to the United States, and my grandmother had relatives in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and so they went to Pittsburgh, stayed there a while, and then went to Aliquippa, Pennsylvania.
I think it's also interesting to know how they got out of the old country. About, what was his name? His name was Isaac, was it not?
Isaac Siegle.
Tell me how Isaac got out of the old country.
He actually escaped in a haystack on a wagon. He paid somebody to take him to the border so that he could escape from Russia. Otherwise,
But your grandmother was with him at that time?
Yes, my grandmother was with him at that time.
Okay.
And they were...
So the situation there was not very favorable for him to be there, was it? No.
Well, the Jewish people had a lot of trouble in Russia, even to this day.
Sure.
And so that was the main reason for him not wanting to serve in the Tsar's army.
Okay. So anyway, then they got to Pittsburgh?
To Pittsburgh.
All right.
My father was born in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, in May of 1889.
Okay.
And he was one of 11 children. My grandparents, after a while, moved to the Boston area, and I don't know what they started, but I know my grandfather was quite industrious and entrepreneurial, and he opened up a dry goods store, which was typical of a lot of Jewish immigrants opening up little businesses. And it was the mainstay of the family until they all died. My mother's folks, her name was Mary Pearl Wolfe. Her folks, I don't know as much about them as I did my Siegle grandparents, but they immigrated from Russia. My grandfather, Morris, was a widower. He was left with 6 children. My grandmother, Jenny, was a widow, left with 1 child. So together, after they married, they had 7 children. I mean, that includes grandma's 1.
Okay.
Together, they produced 6 more children, so that they ended up with 13.
Okay.
And, you know, this day and age, you hear people called stepbrother, stepsister. I was an adult before I ever knew that there was anything like stepsisters or stepbrothers. The family was very cohesive. We were all aunts and uncles and nieces and nephews and cousins.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very harmonious family. I always remember my grandma and grandpa Wolf. They were always had a smile, always pleasant. As a matter of fact, when I was 4 years old, I was in the kindergarten,
Okay.
and they had a dog. They lived in a little town called Hyde Park, Massachusetts, which was, I'd say, 3-4 miles from where I lived in Dorchester. So I asked a neighbor boy if he'd like to take a walk with me to Grandma's house because I wanted a dog. And we crossed car tracks and streets, and for 2 little boys, it was, at that time I didn't know the danger.
Mm-hmm.
Walked into Grandma's kitchen and, "What are you doing here, Richard?" "I come for that dog, Grandma." So she got on the phone, called my mother. "Mary, where is Richard?" "Oh, he's out playing in the yard. He's in my kitchen."
Yeah.
Needless to say, I was getting a nice spanking that night.
Well, that's a nice story, and yeah, that was when you were probably in that Pauline Agassiz Shaw School.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
That, you know, Mabel and I have been very stable in our in moving. We've lived on this farm. It'll be 60 years next year.
Uh-huh.
So I'd say we're quite stable.
But
I think at that time, my folks were moving every few years.
Mm-hmm.
As Dad did better, then they could afford a little better home and so forth. And in this particular case, I was living on Morton Street and began my schooling in Dorchester at the kindergarten at Pauline Agassiz Shaw School.
Mm-hmm.
And I did some of the elementary grades there, and then went on to the 5th and 6th grade at the Roger Walcott School. And in the 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, I went to the Frank B. Thompson School. Now, that was quite a walk. That was at least a mile or 2 every day, back and forth. From the Frank B. Thompson, I went to the Dorchester High School for Boys and was graduated in 1933.
Now, all the time that you were doing this, at that time you probably You were going to Jewish school also?
Well,
Hebrew school?
that was after day school.
Uh-huh.
It was part of our religious training, particularly with the boys, to prepare us for confirmation at 13 years of age.
Mhm.
And we would be taken by bus every day after school. And as I had mentioned to you, one of my classmates at that time was Leonard Bernstein, the world-renowned composer.
Yes.
His mother and my mother were very dear friends. And Leonard was to my home many times and played our piano and entertained us royally.
You didn't know what you were being entertained by, did you?
No. I knew he was a smart young man, but never the capabilities which were forthcoming. I was confirmed. I had a bar mitzvah when I was 13,
Okay.
and that in the Jewish religion, Judaism, is quite a fastidious affair.
Sure.
I was the oldest child and the first in my family to be confirmed, and I can remember it was quite a celebration. And that meant that I became a man in the eyes of God, so that I could serve in a minyan at any time of prayer. At time of prayer, you had to have at least a minyan, or I think it was a minyan is either 11 or 13 people before you hold a prayer service.
I see. Okay.
Of course, you could pray anytime you wanted, but if you were going to hold a service, you had to have a minyan.
So that was a really coming of age
Yeah.
time for.
In that period of time, my father graduated from English high school in Boston. He had a high school education. The folks couldn't send any to college.
Mhm.
And I think my father went out and sold encyclopedias at first.
Okay. Anything to make
And
a
went
living?
on, and he was a tremendous salesman, and he ended up eventually as the New England district manager for the 20 Mule Team Borax Company. If you remember, Ronald Reagan was the moderator of the Death Valley Days, and
Yes.
that
Okay.
entailed Death Valley, the 20 Mule Team Borax. He was with them for 40 years.
I remember the 20 Mule Team Borax advertisements and so on. Yep. Also. Yep.
So that we fortunately, I wouldn't say we were affluent, but we had a very nice home life.
Through hard work for
And
your folks.
that's
and
right, it was
all
all
the way
hard
to
work.
make it
Yeah.
here in the United States.
And
And did you, at that point, at that time, did you find acceptance pretty much within the community that you were in, or was it mostly Jewish community?
well, it was I would say, it was a very mixed community.
Mhm.
I used to run, at that time, the Catholic Church was very anti-Semitic.
Mhm.
And I had some young Irish neighbors.
Mhm.
Their father was a school teacher. They were nice boys. It was a nice family. But time and again, I was reminded that I was
That's Jewish.
Jewish and different from the rest.
Now, you graduated from at Dorchester High School, and then you went on to college. You started college in the Bronx, I believe. Is that correct?
That's right. I New York. I went to New York University for my first year of college, and that was a small school. I would say 700 to 800 students in the Bronx, New York. The main school of New York University is in the city of New York, but I had nothing to do with that. When I was home for Easter vacation, a friend of the family named Jess Londoner when we were youngsters, he lived with us and was just a wonderful human being. He used to tell stories. He used to put my brothers and I to sleep with stories every night. He had the best imagination of anybody I knew. He said to me, at that time, I was called Richie.
Okay.
And he said, what are you doing? Oh, I said, I'm going to NYU, taking pre-med, and I hope to go on further. He said he himself was a detail salesman in the pharmaceutical industry, and he said to me, have you ever thought of becoming a veterinarian? I said, no. He said, well, he says, you know, I call on veterinarians and doctors and others. He says, the veterinarians always have work, the doctors don't.
Okay.
Well, he had quite a conversation with me, and he made his point. So when I went back, I applied for transfer to Michigan State. As a young lad, I had looked at the map, and my curiosity surrounded the Grand Rapids area. I pointed, and the reasons that was so was because Grand Rapids was so well known as the furniture capital of the world, and I was intrigued with the expertise that was developed in this area. And then I thought I'd like to get out of the eastern, the crowded east. I myself like solitude and quiet and live in the country, and so I applied for transfer. I hadn't heard, and I thought, well, I probably won't get in. And this was in 1933. I sent a telegram to the dean of the veterinary school here at East Lansing, Dean Ward Giltner, and I said in very plain English, am I or am I not to matriculate? I got a letter back, matriculate. Well,
very short and sweet. Huh?
After meeting the gentleman, I knew why he liked what I said, and the manner in which I did it. He was no matter of fact. It was all business. You stated your case, and that's it.
Perfect.
And he was a wonderful gentleman.
You like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was in the first 5-year class in veterinary medicine, and it had just changed from 4 years to 5. So I went to Michigan State for 4 more years and was graduated in 1939.
And while you were doing that, you had followed up on it. I think when you went, didn't you tell me that when you were going to school in the Bronx, that you were in the ROTC? And,
In high school.
in high school, okay, and then you followed up on that also in.
Well, I
in
didn't
Michigan
join
State?
the ROT in college, but before I graduated, I went to the ROTC and signed up for the Army Reserve
Okay.
as a first lieutenant in the veterinary corps. And while I was in school, my brother Harrison, he also studied veterinary medicine. He started 2 years after I did. Incidentally, I'm one of 3 boys. My mother had 3 boys in 4 years. I was born 2 weeks before their first anniversary, and my kid brother was born on their anniversary of February 22nd, 19, I guess, or 18. And
Anyway, 4 years after.
yeah. And we're all alive today. Harrison, the youngest, is 86. My brother Arnold is 87. And I'm 89. Will be 90 in February of 2006.
Okay.
But Harrison and I were living with a Mrs. Alice Depper in East Lansing while we were going to school. Her husband, her late husband at that time, started the canoe service on Michigan State campus. And one day she said to me, she says, by that time I was Dick, not Richie.
Right.
So she said, have you ever met my son Woodrow? I said, no. But she says, he's a veterinarian. He's coming here Saturday. And he says, I want the two of you to meet. And that was the beginning of a 62-year friendship. He said to me, what are you doing this weekend? And I happen to have an automobile at the school. I said, nothing. He says, come on out and ride with me. Well, that turned out, by the end of the term, come on out and live with me. And he lived in Grand Ledge, 13 miles from school. And I had the privilege, which couldn't be done today under any circumstances, of practicing veterinary medicine for 8 months before I even got my degree.
You took care of his business.
I took care of his business
Made
while he
his
took care of the
calls.
canoe service.
I see. Well, that worked
But,
out for both of you. Now, about now at that time, you weren't married yet, and hadn't come any, hadn't been
No,
dating anybody or anything.
no,
Okay.
school came first.
Yep. All right. Well, that's a pretty nice way to get out of school and get like kids today. They have practice teaching. I guess you got your practice veterinarian, didn't you?
I felt very confident coming into Alto, and starting right up.
Tell us a little bit about that, how that came about, that you got to Alto.
Well, in May, before I graduated, there was a notice on the bulletin board about the death of Dr. Thorndike here in Alto.
Oh, okay.
And I didn't know what Alto was. And so Dr. Depper and I decided, well, let's take a ride up there.
Mm-hmm.
And he was really a mentor to me. I mean, he helped me so much. Very smart man. He later in life, he went to Detroit 3 days a week. And he was an attorney when and a veterinarian when he ended up.
Oh,
Yeah.
2 degrees, two
Yeah,
jobs.
he was quite a man. And we come up, and I liked what I saw. Mrs. Thorndike was very delightful, and as I said, my mother grew up in a small town. This place appealed to me,
That's all
and here I am 66 years later.
right. Yeah, what was Mrs. Mr. or Dr. Thorndike, of course, had been taking care of our cattle at home when I was a boy, and now we didn't know what we were going to do when we lost the veterinarian. I mean, that was really serious.
Well,
the farmers were very, very upset about that. So they were pretty happy to hear that there was somebody interested in coming here.
Well, because it would be unusual to settle in such a little community when the opportunities during the Depression weren't that great. But here it was an unknown. I could have gone to work for the government at a reasonable salary, and but it was life, the kind of life that I've led, that I was more interested in. And well, I tell you, it's been a wonderful ride.
Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about your early first patients, maybe, or first customers you had, maybe here.
It's funny, here, city kid, at least I was born in the suburban area, not right in the city. I always had dogs,
Sure.
but I was never around too many cattle or pigs or the other
Large animals.
Large animals.
Uh-huh.
and all the other domestic animals. I came here, the first case that I had was a furrow pin and a draft horse out at Enoch and Axel Carlson's, just out of town here.
Tell me what a thorough pin is.
Well, furrow pin, I don't think you're going to see them too often
Yeah.
today, but it was I would think a bursal swelling in the back of the geez, I haven't doctored a horse in so long.
Back of
But I
the
think it was in the rear leg.
Okay,
See?
all right.
Right there. We'll let it go with that.
Yeah,
I
well,
can't.
it's a lame leg. They went lame.
66 years ago.
In other words, they went lame. Yeah,
Yeah, they
Sure.
went lame.
and that was a common thing that we were always read about in our draft horses.
Yeah.
That, man,
Oh,
or they would say they'd been stifled, or something like that, and we read about that.
you know, when I graduated, when we graduated veterinary school, we had a good education, but it sure was lacking in many subjects. There were so many unknowns. I was the first of the new generation of veterinarians. Up until 1939, or it would say 35, 36, a lot of them, you take Dr. Wilkinson that was over to Saranac, we used to say he was a quack. Well, he was grandfathered in because he, through experience, he was able to doctor these animals. Clyde Graham used to do the same thing, did you remember? So, when I came in with some new ideas. And you'd be surprised how difficult it was to change their ideas.
Sure.
When I went out for the first case of milk fever I had, cow is down, can't get up due to a loss of calcium in the blood. And I gave her an intravenous. Farmer said to me, "What's this?" I said, "Well, this is the new way of treating milk fever." Dr. Thorndike used to take a milking tube and an air pump and pump air into each quarter of the bag and push the air would push all the milk back into the bloodstream, and it would reverse the process.
Okay.
Well, where I went and took it and put it directly into the bloodstream, and they'd get up. Well, by nightfall, call, "My cow isn't up." Well, I knew he was in his glory because he wanted to prove me wrong. I went out and just kicked her in the butt, got a hold of the tail, and up she got, But I don't know, I never did too much for that particular man. He didn't like the new ideas.
and taken to it, yeah. Yep.
I
Takes a
think
while.
that, excuse me,
Sure.
I think that you should tell about your health spaying dog and possibly how much you got for that. I think that's quite
Sure.
interesting.
Well, I lived with Mrs. Thorndike. Then the Rankins bought the house. I lived with them, and then their family kept getting larger. So that I ended up living with Frank and Lenny Klein. They were an older couple, probably in their 70s, and they had an apartment upstairs. And I was still single. I used to spay dogs for $4. Now this is 1939, 1940,
Okay.
Owen Ellis was the barber.
He's cut my hair. Gave me my first haircut.
Yep. He also was my anesthesiologist.
Okay.
Well, and surprisingly enough, the barber telephone pole is reminiscent of the early surgeons.
Okay.
So he'd come over and he would help me anesthetize the animal. All I had was the ether. Now this is primitive, and yet we did the best that we could. So we used ether as the anesthesia. I'd take care of them, send them home the same day, and hope that nothing happened.
Okay.
As long as you didn't get too much ether yourself, why,
No.
it's okay, huh?
There's one other little story I might add, because I hope that I made the correct diagnosis. I was called over to Marion Shades, where Ish and Arlene live now. He had a colt thorn, a little foal, and it couldn't get up on its feet. And I examined it, and I thought that the fetlock, the rear fetlock was fractured.
Mm.
No x-ray or anything, but it just from palpation. Well, in school, they said the gun is the easiest way to eliminate those cases.
Oh.
But I never felt that way about the animals. My attitude was, do what you can. Maybe eventually you'll do something that works. So I said to Opal Shade, I said, do you have an old coat hanger? You know, the old wire coat hangers? Yeah. She brought it out to me, and I molded it to the back of the horse's foot and put a little peg on it. And I went up to the blacksmith. That's the days of the early days. The blacksmith was still here in town.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right across the road.
Ed Clark.
Yeah.
And I said, Ed, would you please make me a piece of strap iron about an inch wide and mold it as this wire? Then we attached a couple of pieces of leather to it, leather belts.
Mm-hmm.
I went out to Marion's and I bandaged the foot with cotton. I put the cotton on and then the bandage and then the cast. Well, you know, I went in the Army in September of 41. When I come back in 1946, that horse was plowing the fields. So I felt I did
That's
something.
quite an accomplishment right there.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
That's pretty neat. I think that's been reminiscent of your practice as it goes, because I told you a story one day about my cat that I brought over for you to put to sleep for my family. And instead of the cat, he walked out with some vitamin A and fixed a little sore on his neck, but that cat's not old at all, and that cat's got a long life ahead of it here yet. And so I took my cat back home, not in the bag either. She lived for quite a long while afterward and was quite a family pet.
Well,
I think it's reminiscent of the way you practice, Doctor.
it's so
Now I want you to tell me a little bit about how Mrs. Siegle got into this picture here.
well,
You were in alto, I know, and I think she probably was an alto girl.
my little angelic sweetheart. She worked in the bank, the Farmers State Bank in Alto. She knew what I was worth.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sure.
Had read a report on you.
Well, every Friday night, Wes and Betty Griffin would have a roller skating party about the general store.
Okay.
Well, what is there to do on a Friday night in a little town? So everybody congregates and has a good evening out of it.
Of Rosenberg.
Yeah, out of Rosenberg store.
It's a dance hall. They use
Yeah.
that floor to.
You know, the floors,
Sure.
No,
I don't know if they had tamarack logs or not, but
no,
anyway,
and
had a little bounce to them. Well, I get up there one night, and young lady was all alone, you know, looking around for me. And I went up to her and I said, can you skate? No. Would you like to skate? And that was the beginning of the skating romance.
There you go.
And we had a lot of fun together. We would go dancing at what was that place out in Wayland?
Dixie.
The Dixie. Oh, and we'd square dance.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, in May of 41, we were married. In August of 41, I got my papers to report for duty on the 9th of September. Little did I know that we were going to war.
Mhm.
And then we get into the military history.
Right. Now tell me a little bit about, I think you got married about that time. You
Yeah.
asked her, you popped her the question, right?
Yeah,
In
in
41?
May of 41 we
And,
were married.
You had a big wedding, I understand?
Yeah, we eloped.
Right?
We told Mabel's folks that we were going to a baseball game down to Detroit.
Mhm.
And we went over into Wasion, Ohio, to the Justice of Peace, and got a license. And this on a Friday afternoon, and usually at sundown, a rabbi wouldn't marry you. But I said to him, I said, is there a rabbi around that we can go for marriage? Well, he said, you got to go to Toledo. Well, we hurried to Toledo, and we made arrangements, and we were married on a Friday afternoon before sundown. And it's surprisingly, the rabbi had a black lady that worked in the house, and she was one of our witnesses to our wedding.
Okay. All right. So now you get, and then shortly you just nicely get married, and you get your call then to go to the service. And where do you report?
Report to Chicago at the Quartermaster Depot.
And you were there for quite a while, or?
Well, I was there just a year. Mind you, I was one of the early ones that went in. There weren't many ahead of us. So at the end of a year, I think I was off, they made me a captain, and the colonel said to me, he said, I want you to go out to Cudahy, Wisconsin, and take charge of the inspection of Cudahy packing up there. Fine. So at that time, we'd already had a daughter, and
What was her name?
Marion Ruth.
I wondered if you were going to remember.
And so I went up and I looked for an apartment or a home. Mabel and the baby were still in Chicago.
Okay.
And we found a home with an elderly lady, a widow lady, just about a block off of Lake Michigan in South Milwaukee.
Okay.
Grandma Hannah.
Mm.
And we had the most wonderful time there with this lady. She loved us and we loved her, and she loved Marion, and it was
And that isn't all. I've got to, she was an English lady, and she loved her kidneys.
Oh.
And he could get them, you see, at the packing plant.
Oh.
And he'd bring those home to her every once in a while. Well, the day she would cook those, there was the day that I planned to be out of the house.
yeah. Oh,
So he was making brownie points with her and
Yeah.
made you out of the house at the same time.
yeah. And let's see, so that was 42, and in 43,
And that Japanese war is going
Yeah,
on now. They
and,
attacked Pearl Harbor in December of
so I
41.
I got orders to go overseas.
Okay.
And in fact, our daughter was just 2 years old.
The day the orders came through.
And
Mm.
and I was shipped out to Pittsburgh, California. We went out there by train, and
Right. You can see by the map here, probably, Nick.
that was south of San Francisco. That was a staging area for the Pacific.
Okay.
And I got there in January or early February, and didn't leave until the 7th of March of 1943. and we were shipped in the beautiful luxury liner, the Canard liner USS Monterey, and took us 15 days to get over to Milne Bay, New Guinea.
We're to New Guinea, so you went actually
The
all the way
southern
around the world at the back.
tip. Well, that happened to be all through the Pacific,
Yes,
and
the North Pacific.
yeah, and
We over here to New Guinea.
but you know, even as bad as conditions were with the submarines, we fared fairly well. We never had too many scares getting over there.
Okay. And then was there quite a few people on the ship with you?
Oh, it was a full load,
Full load.
full load. And I happened to,
Three boatmates?
nice Jewish boy, you know,
Uh-huh.
I happened to be associated with a group of chaplains, every denomination. And they were in my group that when we went over as a group,
All right.
and made lots of friends with them. We had, and when I got to Milne Bay, Father John Collins, his father was the mayor of East Grand Rapids. He was my bunkmate,
Isn't
and
that?
we became very good friends. When he was a boy, he used to come summers out here to the Googety Farm across from the Porridge Farm on 92nd Street. And I never knew him at that time, but it was surprising. Here you go halfway around the world and meet up with somebody that's practically a next door neighbor.
I think that happens lots of times because some people will talk to a lot of people and find out where they're from.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
The people that don't talk to other people never know who they're missing, you know? And that's what I have found that, you know, it don't matter where in the world you go, hardly today, sometime you run into somebody that knows somebody that you know.
Oh yeah, I met a lot of them overseas that
Yeah.
knew people that I knew.
So you had a pretty uneventful ride then over as far as the war was concerned, and you ended up there in New Guinea. And what was your duties there?
Basically, it was food inspection
Okay.
of all the rations and anything that came in by ship.
Mhm.
I was part of a group at the quartermaster depot,
Okay.
and I lived in a BOQ, a bachelor officers' quarter, and that part of New Guinea, it was either awful hot or you'd run into the monsoons and you'd run into floods.
Mm.
I did show you a picture there. 3 o'clock in the morning, woke up and my cot was touching the water.
Oh.
There were 4 of us that's standing in the water up to our knees in the tent.
I guess I don't have that one right here, but you have some pictures of, I think, well, this is it? Is this one of them? Oh, here it is, right here. Can you get that picture, Nick? That's, it rained that quick, huh? It really came down.
Comes down to the mountains and could wash you into the sea.
Hmm. Now, did you meet many of the people there?
Well, you couldn't help it. They were somewhat nomads in a way, and they'd be traveling by foot all over the island. And
You're talking about the natives?
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
the natives.
Native people?
And the man was the patriarch and the woman was subservient. He'd walk in the front of the line with his cane and pompous, you know, and all his harem is behind him, following in order.
So he'd have more than one wife then?
It appeared that way to me. I never asked them.
Okay, so we got some pictures there of a few of the native folks that Doctor had met, And actually, there was a whole group of natives. Now, while you were there, you also had a jeep of your own. Is that right? That you had
As
used
an
on?
officer, I could commandeer a vehicle for work.
Okay.
Yeah, and
So that got you around to some other
Well, then I could-
places.
I was more mobile than the
Yeah.
average GI. Funny thing, Marguerite Rosenberg, Merle Rosenberg's wife, was a Sullivan from Ionia,
Okay.
and her brother Johnny was over in New Guinea, north of me.
Okay.
And I got word of that. He was a captain in the artillery, and so I made arrangements that I'd be stop in to see him some night, visit him. And he and I had quite a nice evening together.
Yeah.
And I'm the last person close to the family that ever saw him. He was killed by our own bullets when he went north in New Guinea. And I knew some others that I were barracked with that were subsequently killed by our own friendly fire.
Yeah. Right. I guess New Guinea. Can you tell us how long were you there actually in New Guinea?
Just about a year, because it was almost a year to the day that I left to go to the Philippines.
Okay.
Manila had just been recaptured, and the country was free, freed of the Japanese.
They've been roasted by that time.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Now, you had some time on your hands a little bit occasionally. Get a little time off, and you did little things on the beach. Did you look for stuff and find different artifacts and so on?
Yeah, I could commandeer a boat so we'd go to the islands off of New Guinea,
Okay.
right where the natives lived.
All right.
And as we show you, this is what's called a cat eye. It was popular to go over and trade with the natives. It's I guess a semi-precious stone. And I would, to keep active, make a little jewelry. I made this for Mabel. I took an Australian shilling and pounded it, and I still had a little strength. And then I would make little catches and seal that on there.
You mean the back, and then you put the cat eye on that.
And then I made her a heart and put a little hook on there. And these were
Right.
earrings.
Uh-huh.
And so that's,
So now she was back home with the baby.
yeah,
And did you communicate pretty well?
she'll
You
have
like
to,
the city?
she'll have to,
Oh my goodness,
This
she's
is-
prepared
this is
for this.
communications.
Huh?
This is all communication.
Isn't that? You kept this big book like this.
Yeah.
Huh? This is pretty nice.
I didn't miss many days.
Didn't you? You got a letter. Look at
Well,
this.
that's
It's full.
2 years of
Look at this.
correspondence.
Look at this. Just hold that over there. Look at there. They've kept all the correspondence in here, so they can go back and read
Yes.
letters. Boy, I bet there's some juicy stories in those letters. What do you bet? Huh?
Yeah, my daughters have wondered which ones were the juicy ones. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that gives us a little idea of how you kept in touch and kept your marriage together.
Well,
And that was hard for a lot of folks to do.
That's right.
we were so fortunate to have parents
We're
that
supporting.
cared about their children.
Okay.
Mabel and Marion would spend 6 months a year with her folks at Caledonia on the farm.
Mhm.
And the other 6 months she'd spend with my folks in Massachusetts, in the suburbs.
Okay.
And needless to say, that made both grandparents very happy to have their little grandchild.
Absolutely.
That was the only one for, the first one for either family.
Now, in the Philippines, you what were the conditions there as far as the people were concerned that you
Well,
saw?
you can imagine after the Japanese occupation that they were very happy that they were free. It was, you just see utter devastation around, and hunger. It was a shame. These people were real hungry. When we landed in the Philippines,
See, the Philippines is up here a little further up north of New Guinea, and up here to you landed actually in Manila, didn't you?
Manila,
And that's not too far from Corregidor, I believe.
that's right,
And the bay
in the
is
Bataan
right there.
Peninsula.
The Bataan Peninsula. Okay.
We bivouacked initially in a big park in downtown Manila, and it wasn't long. Well, I should mention that at this particular time, then I met a bacteriologist who taught at Tulane University in Louisiana, and we became well acquainted. And he said to me one day, he says, "How about going to the leprosarium?" Gee whiz, just the word leprosy was scary enough,
Yeah.
I said, fine. So we got an invitation to be invited to the leprosarium, and it was rather revealing. I mean, you hear about these things, but when you see the people afflicted with leprosy, you can't help but thank God that you're in one piece. Their noses would erode, their fingertips, their toes, they'd lose them, and they became cripples, invalids. And to tell the truth, just the facial expressions and the looks of these people was horrendous. Abnormalities that just made them look like freaks.
We hear those stories, and the Bible stories of the leper colonies and so on and so forth. We don't really
You have to see to
you
believe.
see something like that, and then it hits. Then you.
Then it
It
hits
really
home.
hits home then.
So even as horrible as it was an experience that you needed.
Well, I can still relate to it
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
Thank God that we have treatment now to cure them, and
Now you were working in lab work there, weren't you? In the
Yeah.
lab?
it's funny. I did quite a few things. I wanted something to do, then I got in with a hospital laboratory, and naturally, the first thing you do is try to employ these natives to give them some means to subsist. Well, when you hire the natives, you also have to screen them pretty well. And it was my job to microscopically screen them
Okay.
for all kinds of excretions and secretions.
Okay.
Lots. They revealed quite a lot. Some of it made me wonder why they were still mobile.
Wow.
You'd find so many diseases in them. But there again, the body builds an immunity, they build a resistance, and they survive.
So
But that was an interesting part of my work.
you used to look for roundworms and hookworms here in the animals, and
Oh, but this was
that was
Shigella, hookworms, roundworms. Oh goodness.
Tapeworms?
Huh?
What? Are there any tapeworms?
There'd be tapeworms.
Yeah.
And schistosomiasis, a lot of the tropical diseases. But, you know, when you stop to think of the way these people subsisted, it's a wonder that they didn't have more disease than that.
You get food anywhere they could get it.
Yeah. You know, after leaving Manila, I went to the 5th Air Force. I was BOQ'd at Fort Stotzenberg.
Okay.
And can't tell you how long I was there, but I was with as I said, the 5th Air Force.
Yes.
And they all were my buddies, so everyone.
All pilots, huh?
Yeah, they were all pilots.
Okay.
And occasionally, if I wasn't doing anything, hey, Siegle, what are you doing today? Let's go for a ride. They had maybe they had to get down to one of the islands, and
Okay.
so I was able to get down to some of the islands. They were somewhat devastated at the time. But one instance, I hope nobody's listening, we had the General's DC-3,
Oh.
and I was a passenger. Can't remember, his name was Red anyway. He was the pilot. And he made his call, and on the way back, we were coming over Bataan Peninsula and Corregidor and everything. I said, say, Red, I said, slow down. I said, this is my only opportunity to look this place over.
Okay.
He says, well, if you want it, he says, take the joystick. So I went up to there in the general's plane, and I was turning it around, you know.
Oh, and flying it
I
over
was
the island.
able to look at Bataan. I went right along the side of Bataan Peninsula. I could see all the installations, and then you begin to look back, and you could see why our poor boys were slaughtered, you know, and then saw Corregidor, but and I saw an inactive volcano up in northern Luzon. It was non-combatant, but it was still part of my service, you know.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
What were you doing there? Were you doing lab work there too?
you know, I can't remember. I don't think I was probably in between.
You were waiting to come home, that was.
No,
what
I
you were
was in
doing.
between assignments.
Oh,
Then from there, I was assigned to a quartermaster depot on base up in Lingayen Gulf, which is, the closest city is Filipino speaking is Angeles, or we would call it Angeles.
Okay.
And we were on the western coast of Luzon. And I'll tell you, nightfall, the sunsets were the most beautiful, the most gorgeous that I've ever seen. I mean, you know, you could look across the China Sea, and that sun, it just beautiful, beautiful.
And the reflection.
And
back
that was
on the wall.
officers' mess hall. And sadly enough, when we left the mess hall, these poor little Filipino children were there with little buckets. And we took whatever was left on our plate, which we would call our garbage. It would go into their pails, and that was their meals.
Yeah.
And
How
it even,
many
got,
of you?
it even got so bad that a lot of the food that we condemned and threw into dumps, food dumps, was eaten, salvaged by these people, scavenged. I hope none of them died, but, you know, they were hungry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was after the Japanese had been there and then
And devastated the country, you know.
Now, the Filipino people that you saw were a little different than the New Guinea people. Now, the New Guinea people, there's a picture of a New Guinea person, and dressed in a grass skirt, I guess, and that's about
Right.
it.
They didn't wear shoes. It was a primitive, let's say, island dress of very primitive people.
And then the
Probably not too far from cannibals.
Really?
You know, I don't know, but I know there was cannibalism in New Guinea years ago, and these people, no shoes. The only thing they'd wear would be a loincloth, or the women wear a grass skirt, but their upper body was never covered, their heads were never covered. And one thing I think I told you, how by walking barefoot, these people developed calluses, almost unbelievable, an inch thick on the soles of their feet. And that was impervious to the coral. They could walk over coral, which was just like glass, never bothered them. You and I walked on it, and it would burn, cut us up, and then would bleed profusely.
But then the little Filipino kids, or the Filipino people, they were dressed differently.
Oh, they were more modern. They, you know, they had lived under the Americans for years. They were more educated. I met lots of doctors, Filipino doctors, and they worked for us in the hospital, in the laboratories. And no, they were a different class of people altogether. We used to, when I was in, well, particularly there at Fort Stotzenberg, we had a BOQ, Bachelor's Officers Quarters. We would hire a Filipino lady to come in and do our washing and ironing.
Okay.
And, you know, she, other than going barefoot, because it was more comfortable, you couldn't tell the difference. They were a little more, I would say, yeah, they're probably a little more darker skinned. More darker isn't good in English, but they're a little darker skinned than the average person. But I found them very, very nice people. Very nice.
Right. Now you, I think this was about November of '45. You'd accumulated some points. Is that what I understand? In the years and time that you'd spent there, which is
Spent a lot of time.
a little over 4 years.
Yeah. So I had, well, I had a lot of points, so that I was high on the list for coming home.
Uh-huh.
And on November 4th, 1945, coincidentally Mabel's birthday,
Okay.
I was told to report down over the ledge. I was really on the land mass, and the water was just over the hill.
Oh.
And there was a boat there waiting to take us home. It was an old Liberty ship that was full of machinery that wasn't unloaded, so they were taking it back to the States. Maybe 6 to 8 of us officers were privileged to ride for 1 month, and we were part of the crew, ate with the crew, and it wasn't too bad.
So you had your own little ship to come home on.
Yeah.
Huh?
It took us well, from November 4th, and crossing the international date line, I landed in Long Beach, California on the 5th of December 1945. Called my mother, and she informed me that I became an uncle that day for the first time.
How about that? So that trip home then was pretty quiet. There was no action or
No action, but a lot of
problem.
squall, Pacific squalls, I'll tell you.
You
Some of them
experienced those.
Some of them were rather threatening. You know, you'd get in and you'd look up and you'd wonder whether you were going to be hit a cyclone. The rain would be torrential. But other than that, it was uneventful.
All the time that you've been talking about the time you spent in the Philippines and meeting Filipino people and New Guinea people and so on. How was you being a Jew in all of that area over there? Did that all have any bearing? Did it?
Only with my fellow officers.
Okay.
Here I was a superior officer,
Okay.
and of course that would just gall some of them.
Okay.
And I had 3 officers I introduced myself to when I came in. They never spoke to me one time, all the time we were in the Philippines.
Isn't that right?
Yeah, they just hated me for only one reason, and I never did any harm to them.
Mhm.
But
So there was
that's
anti-Semitism
like, you know,
there too. Huh?
one of the things you endure, and as well, at one time we were probably a minority, but they don't consider Jews a minority today. But when there's distinctions, when people think they're better than you, you know, it's a hard thing. To me, I'm very, very tender-hearted, and that hits me right in the solar plexus, because what does hate do? It just makes you more hateful, and you lose your personality as a human being. And I try never to lose that. I try to be uplifting and have a good time and enjoy life.
We're so apt, I think, not not that I'm a Jew or anything, but in like things, we're so apt to when we become hateful of something someone else is doing, we're so apt to fall into the same trap and do the same thing then. If we get so hateful about it.
It's so easy to do,
Yeah.
you know, to stand up for righteousness isn't in some people's vocabulary.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's easier to condemn because if you side with right and wrong is in the majority, then you're going to be an outcast too.
Yeah.
So a lot of
And I guess I'd like to, you can tell me a little about your homecoming after you landed in California. Did anybody come to where did you first see Mabel, that kind of thing? And your trip from Long Beach to
we came by train to Fort Sheridan,
by train.
and I was mustered out at Fort Sheridan, Illinois.
Mhm.
And I think you came up to Fort Sheridan, didn't
I
you?
sure did.
Yeah, and then we had some dear friends that we had met in the Army.
Well, we had lived with them. I mean, they had been
Yeah.
in Milwaukee
Yeah,
when we were there.
Cheryl and Francis, wasn't it?
Jerry and
It
Francis
was
Beck.
Beck. They were from Minnesota, but they were just lovely people. And so they were the first ones we went up and we spent time with them. Here, she was barren. They'd been married longer than us, I
Oh,
think.
yeah.
They never had any children.
Okay.
And they were more religious, so that they lived in closer
very narrow-
parameters than
a
Mabel
narrow-
and I.
Oh, okay.
But this particular time we went out and we had good times. We had a little wine, which I don't drink very often, and we had a nice evening.
Uh-huh.
And 9 months afterwards, they had a baby.
Oh.
And after that, they couldn't stop.
Oh.
I don't know how many children they had after
five.
that.
They had 5 girls.
But sadly enough, wonderful friends.
Mm.
But Jerry died, and then I don't know. We lost track of.
Mm.
He tried so
But I
hard
made
to
some
find
wonderful friends in the Army.
Yeah.
The Utleys, the Brinkers, the Lockwoods. Dr. Brinker is going to be 93 years old the 10th of October. And we've been friends for almost 65 years. And he was the head of research, surgical research in dogs and cats particularly at Michigan State. And a lot of the bone operations that were done in humans was a result of what he did in veterinary medicine.
Okay.
He was it's a pleasure to have made the friendship, and I mean real, sincere friendship, of a man who became the #1 veterinarian of the world.
Oh,
He was selected as #1.
And he was
In the
so
world.
honored. And he was so honored with it.
He was, and he is so humble.
Hmm.
You know, but those are
Those are great friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those are good.
Those
Yeah.
are great friends. So, your wife and daughter had been here all that time, staying with the other people, with her folks and your folks, and so now you've got to get back here and start to put a life back together. I guess I have just one other kind of thing that I'd like to ask you. It's a question. I don't know if you can answer off the top of your head or not, but just how did being in the service and your service time, that you spent it, how did it affect the rest of your life? Did it have an effect?
well, maybe a better appreciation of being an American.
Okay.
You know, not that I ever had any doubts that this was the greatest country in the world, and for what it's done for my people, along with all the other immigrants. You know,
Yeah.
what does it say on at Ellis Island? Give me your starving and but I would say that is a salient point.
Mhm.
But
Good.
I was happy to serve. I was fortunate having a profession where I was a non-combatant and wasn't in any danger at any time. My brother, Arnold,
Yes.
who was in the infantry and served in the Aleutian Islands, he had more danger up there when the Japs were
Sure.
fighting. But you got to know my brother Arnold and know he's quite a gregarious and he's doing something all the time. He and the general were such good friends. He said to the general, my brother was a wonderful cook, but he could do anything. He talked the general into, after the war subsided, the Japanese were out of the Aleutian Islands, to opening up an officers club. And my brother was known all over the South Pacific as the place to stop for a good meal for any of the Navy, up in that area.
Okay. All right, we're back home here, and one of the things that you had bought just before you got into service, where you started your practice there, was a car. I believe a 1941 Plymouth. What happened to that all the time you were gone?
Well, that was up on stilts, on blocks,
All right.
and it was in good shape when I got back. It hadn't had many miles on it.
Almost 5 years of sitting there, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. So you had your car. Now you gotta start making a life for this lady that has this little.
Yeah,
little,
that was a
child.
difficult
Tell us
thing.
about that. What you thought about
Here-
that? How did you decide to start? Did you have any doubts about starting here? And
I had lots of doubts about even what was I going to do with the rest of my life.
Okay.
Here you're regimented for 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
You get paid every payday. I had responsibility, but then as far as worrying about money, it was there every day. No. We came home and we lived with Mabel's folks, and then my mentor, Dr. Depper, in Grand Ledge, said, why don't you come down and come with us for a while? So I was practicing there with him, and little did I know, because it all came out afterwards, that his intentions were that he wanted me to be his partner in veterinary practice. And but he never mentioned that. We worked, and poor Mabel had to do a lot of babysitting. They were busy. He was on the road a lot with his canoe service, and he was quite an industrious individual, an entrepreneurial man.
Okay.
And he was the mayor of Grand Ledge. He was on the school board. He was a very active citizen. So after a while, Mabel said to me, she says, I don't think that Grand Ledge is for us. About that time, Fred Hirsch, the apostolic minister here,
Yeah.
and Mott Vanderjack on the opposite end of town, up here on towards Ada,
Okay.
they heard that I was back in town, and they wanted me to come back to Alto. Well, it's from 1941 to 1939 to 41, just the end of the Depression. I didn't know whether I could come back to Alto and make a living. And it was quite a decision. So I sat down, Mabel and I sat down, and we figured out what it might cost us for minimal expenses, what would have to gross in a month to survive
Okay.
or subsist. Well, it all figured up to about $500 gross a month. 1946, $500 a month. A gross of $6,000 a year. But I was happy, and I said, we'll try it.
Okay.
Well, we were very frugal during the war. Unfortunately, being in my official capacity as an officer, we were able to save probably a little more than other people. And because our parents were so good to us and didn't charge anything for the care for 6 months for the year, we put as much as we could away every month in the way of United States bonds. So that when we came out, we were able to pay half down on this farm and bought it.
And that's part of the land where you're living now, the
Yeah.
new house here.
Yeah.
And that was on Bancroft Avenue here.
We bought this farm because it looked to me as though it had a lot of potential. It had 7 buildings on it, a nice barn, a very old home. The original home was a lean-to, but everybody that owned it added to it. We added more to it. And so everything evolved in such a manner that it's unbelievable that I made the choices that I made. They seemed premature at the time, but proved to be wise and
And that was
led
about
to a successful life.
that was around 1946.
Yeah.
That you did that. And so you went along taking care of the cows, and that was about the time that you used to come and take care of my dad's cows, and you bring me that nice shiny dime and give it to that little farm kid, and I'll always remember that as long as I live. Look forward to that, talking with you and seeing you when you come to take care of one of Dad's cows. And anyway, and then for about 4 years, apparently you've done that till you started in, was it 1950 when you got the idea about the hospital?
Yeah, I decided I should remodel our 3-stall garage.
Okay.
I thought I should have a nice office for the farmers to come into. And while I was doing that, I made a little hospital along with it. And we hired Les Graham. He worked the whole year. I don't know how long he was, over a year. He was at our place every day, and he remodeled the hospital, remodeled the house, and here a man that was literally a hermit became a human being again, and even got married after that.
Yes.
I mean, our association gave him an appreciation for family, and he was just a wonderful human being. Nothing in this world he couldn't do.
He was a great craftsman.
Yeah, great
Sure
craftsman.
was. Yep. Then in about, wasn't it 1954 when your father passed away? Is that?
Yes. He had an abscess due to diverticulosis. So nobody knew enough about the condition to diagnose it, and he died. And it's tough when you're away, and you never lose sight of the fact that of your folks and what they've done for you through your life.
He was in
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts,
And
right?
he had just retired 60 days when he died.
my
And Mabel and I discussed doing some remodeling in the house. We wanted to take the wallpaper off, so we were going to go down to Fisher Drummond in Grand Rapids and rent a wallpaper steamer.
Okay.
Well, things had happened in the meantime that I was thinking in terms of enlarging my practice. I'm getting a little ahead of the story, but anyway. So I saw a place for sale in Cascade, and eventually, with a good advice from Charlie Colby, the banker, we bought it.
Now that was on Cascade Road.
Yeah.
Just
Just at the confluence of Cascade Road and 28th Street.
yes.
Nothing there. Farms, 500 people in the township. Nothing, but I was just, after we had opened up the little hospital,
Right.
I was starting to get so many people coming from out of town
Sure.
that I decided to meet them halfway.
And there's a lot more people over that way. Sure.
And it
In the
turned out
meantime,
to
I think you had had another child or two, too.
Yes.
Gee,
How
yeah.
about that? You were just
6 years between Marion and Judy.
okay.
Marion was born in 42. Judy was born in 48. Annette was born in 49. Rick was born in 53. So now I have children that from 52 to 63, you know.
There you go.
And Rick is a veterinarian, took over my practice, doing, I bought an old farmhouse that was over 100 years old. When Rick graduated veterinary school in 1978, after 9 months, I just said, "This is your practice," and I went to the attorney and signed it all over to him. We didn't even talk about money. It was just my son, and I wanted him to have a good start in life. I saw a future there, but I never imagined that it to be what it turned out to be. I knew there was a potential, but never what that young man developed.
And then you, with your guidance though and perseverance, I know that's how the new hospital got started that he has there. Sure.
He
And,
built
how many square feet is that? That's a big hospital now.
after 2 additions, I think he's got 18,000 square feet.
Far cry from the little hospital that was started on Cascade Road.
Or even here in
There was
in
one
the
here that was started
Yeah.
here, and then you started the one there.
he came to me and he said, "Dad, I think it's time to build a new hospital, a new office or something. That scared me.
Huh.
You know, I was so conservative, we didn't have much money, and I thought, well, I said, Rick, you go do your homework.
Okay.
And I said, then you come back and we'll talk it over and then we'll go from there.
Mhm.
4 years, he did his homework. And he traveled all around the Midwest visiting hospitals.
And my dining room table was never empty.
Yeah.
Almost
Yeah.
He lived at home with us,
Okay.
and he came up with plans, had this hospital built, and did a lot of the work in conjunction with the architect. The architect
design.
did the overall design of it. And that hospital was selected as the Hospital of the Year for the United States in 1983.
You didn't know that?
Yep.
That is a pretty nice accomplishment.
And
That is a great accomplishment.
oh, and from then on, I don't know where he got it, but it has developed into a referral hospital now. Even Michigan State refers the cases to it.
That.
So that's quite, that says quite a lot.
That says a lot.
Now, you should tell that both your girls graduated from Central.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
I think
Marion
About
is
the girl.
Marion is a cosmetologist. She has a beautiful shop in Cascade. Judy graduated from Central Michigan University. Annette graduated from Central Michigan. And Rick from Michigan State. Well, we might as well tell you what the end results of two people.
There you go.
You know what happens
All right.
through the years.
That's
Our
beautiful.
daughter Marion never married. Judy married Ken Friedrich. They've been married, they're going to be married 33 or 34 years this October. They have 2 children. Our first grandchild, Julie, is going to be 32 years old here shortly. She's an invalid, complete invalid. She was strangled at birth by the umbilical cord.
Oh.
And those 2, Judy and Ken, for 26 years took care of that girl, and never once did I ever hear them complain. Today she lives in a foster home, and Judy sees her once a week, and then they take her home every weekend. They have a son, Tom. Tom was just 27.
He was 27.
27. Well, I'm so proud of him. He went to school at Michigan State. He graduated from Lowell High, went to Michigan State. His first year, he fooled around. Here from a country school, you know, and a small city, tough surroundings. He goes to state and he forgets himself.
Mm-hmm.
But he still ended up with a 3.5 average.
Okay.
The rest of his college career was straight 4-point. And Tom is a kind of a kid. He's laid back, but yet he's ready. He's got the bit in his mouth.
Okay.
He got to know them, the graduate school professors,
Okay.
and they awarded him a research project when he was a sophomore. And he was the first undergraduate that they ever awarded a research project to. He was in the Department of Psychology. Well, as I say, he did very well. And when he graduated, these graduate school professors said to him, they said, Tom, he wanted to go to graduate school, and they said, we are writing, 2 of the professors, we're writing letters of recommendation for you. He was admitted to Illinois, Minnesota, Cornell, and Michigan State. He wanted to go to Cornell. He went over to Cornell and he negotiated. He's a negotiator.
Okay.
And he made a good deal with them. That was a 2-year course. in the new uh, uh, graduate school above the MBA. I think it's International Labor Relations,
Okay.
Human Resources. Well, he had a girlfriend, so when she graduated, they decided maybe we ought to look into Minnesota. Maybe they can give him a better.
Go on.
It's a funny story, because they went up to Minnesota and they noticed that the rent up there was very high in Minneapolis.
Okay.
So he negotiated with Minnesota, and they made him a better offer than Cornell. But he didn't know what he said. He says, I'm gonna negotiate again with Cornell. So he used the Minnesota computers and corresponded with Cornell, and they met his demands because he was the highest qualified applicant applying for
Okay.
graduate school. So they wanted him badly. He had a job before he graduated grad school with Visteon Corporation. And they've been out in Philadelphia, but the best of it is a headhunter heard about him and his ability and got him an interview with GE.
Okay.
9 people interviewed him in Cincinnati, and GE made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Can you imagine this young kid?
There you go.
So he's out in Winfield, Kansas now. He bought a home in Derby, Kansas, south of Wichita. And this kid, not married, but I'm so proud of what our grandson. Annette has 4 children. John is a graduate of Central. He's an engineer at Perigo Drug. He also is interested in the environment, so he opened up a hydroponics business in the west side of Grand Rapids, along with his job at Perigo, and that's taken off. He's so surprised at how it's doing. He's married, got 1 child and 2 on the way,
Oh.
twins. Poor John had a very serious operation, and about the time Mabel was sick. Then we got 1 the first great-grandchild. Took 87 years to have a great-grandchild, but we got a great-grandson there.
Okay.
Then Stephanie is married to Dennis Landry. He works as for the Chrysler as their service manager in Hastings.
Okay.
They live in Middleville. They just bought a new home. They've got a little daughter, so we've got 2 great-grandchildren.
All right.
Then Rick,
Well, you've got 2 more grandchildren there on that family. You've got Erica, who has graduated Central.
Erica graduated Central. She's a parole officer up at Roscommon, Michigan.
All right.
And at a time when jobs were hard to get, she never had any difficulty getting a job. So I figured the kid must have something on the ball. Now,
Chip off the old block there.
Alexa.
Alexa, she's starts her 2nd year at Weston. So we have all of our grandchildren to the present time of either graduated or in college. Rick's got 2 more that I know will go to college.
His boys he has 2 boys.
Yeah, they're 9 and 12, and the oldest one will be 13, the 11th of October. He was born on Dr. Brinker's 80th birthday, so I can keep track of it.
And their names are what?
Their names are Clayton, he's the oldest, and Grant.
And Grant.
And Rick lives on the family, he owns the family farm over to Caledonia. And has lived there for a long time now.
Yeah.
Well, that's really neat about your family and the family as you get back in, after being in the service, getting back into the community again. And I know that you belong to some organizations in the community. And can you tell me about some of those that you belong to?
But you know, it affected me very deeply. All of my family in the Masonic order.
Uh-huh.
I was a D Malay.
Okay. Yeah.
One day, Charlie Colby, who was a past master at the lower lodge, came to me. You never hear of anybody saying, here's an application. Usually you have to ask. But Charlie and I, he must have thought a lot of me, because he brought an application. He said, sign it. So right then I figured I had made it. You know what I mean? When the community, particularly something like that, to go into an order like the Masons, and they invite me. Well, I was raised in 1948, so you figure it's 57 years, I think, or 55 or something.
Will be.
That I
Yes.
So I've been a life member for a number of years. And then in the 1960s, I got a call, and somebody said, well, you know, Dave Coombs is resigning from the school board, and would you like to take his place? We'd like you to take his place. You know, to tell the truth, I said, what's this all about? You know, coming to me, I thought I was an unknown here in this little burg, you know, minding my own business, working hard.
People were noticing.
Yeah, so I don't think that I don't feel in my own mind I contributed a lot, but at least I was there. I was on the school board for almost 8 years. And the nicest thing of it all was I was president of the school board when my son Rick graduated, and I was able to give him his diploma. That was a high point in my life.
Absolutely. That's okay. That's a good time to just take a little break here. You know, I think, is there anything, Mrs. Siegle, that you would like to add to what we've talked about here?
Well, there's been a lot talked about, a lot of life. We've had many good times. We've had nice trips. After we retired, we had a good number of years to be able to spend our winters down south, and made another group of friends down there. And they've been, well, we went down to the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, down near Mission. And we've enjoyed that. We miss it, but our children don't think that we should be going back anymore. They think that we're to that age where they have been down there and they know how those people drive down there. They're bad here at times, but I think they're much worse down there. So they think we should stay home. So I have a feeling that that's probably what we will do. But it's been a good life. You can't deny that. And we've had a long life.
Yes, we've been fortunate. Another highlight, in 1992, that was our last trip abroad. It was about close to a month that we went abroad, and we landed in Lisbon on February 4th. We stayed overnight and then flew from Lisbon to Casablanca, Morocco on the 5th. And here, went into the hotel, all marble, beautiful place. Come down, we went up and had a rest because we hadn't had much sleep. And the gal at the desk said to me, "Happy birthday." It was my 76th birthday. And I said, "My, you do read the passports, don't you?"
Oh.
She read them.
Okay.
Well, but listen to this. we went out and we walked around Casablanca. Mabel and I just as tourists, you know. When we get back, here's a gorgeous, beautiful bouquet of flowers in my room, in our room. At supper, we ate at the hotel restaurant. And I thought it was rather odd. The maitre d' and the other waiters were waiting for us at the door.
Hmm.
And they ushered us in, sat us down, you know, and then we were getting so much attention. I couldn't understand it. And, you know, they hovered over us, made sure that we got what we wanted and so forth. Are you through? Yeah, we're through. He goes to the back room. He brings out a French cake. You know, one of these, like a sponge cake that's been cut and then there's a pudding between it. It was beautiful. Oh, that big.
Yeah.
This is for you.
Hmm.
The lights go out. Happy birthday.
You got the royal treatment.
I got
Yeah.
the royal treatment, I tell you.
Wasn't that nice?
And I just had never forgotten it. And then, in retrospect, here it's a Muslim country.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Doesn't that kind of say something though, in a way? You know, if we look at the world, we hear all the bad things, but if we just look at the world overall, there's so many good things happening that we never hear about.
And if you dwell on the bad things, you're digging a hole. You're going to fall into it.
And I can see how you have used that to overcome many things in your life. I can see it, I can feel it, I can hear it.
Well,
And you know, I think that tells us a lot about this interview. And you know, Dr. Siegle and Mrs. Siegle, Nick and I want to really thank you, just personally thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to talk with you and have this interview. We want to from the Lowell Area Historical Museum. They want to thank you very much for letting us record this, because recording this life for our military history so that it can be preserved for future generations in our military history project, as well as the Michigan Military History Project and the National Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. So, Dr. Siegle, we want to thank you for sacrificing 5 years, basically, of your life in the service of our country. And, you know, I really mean this because of people like you, for whatever you did, we are able to live in a country where we can build our businesses, we can raise our families under a blanket of freedom. You are a very great American. Thank you.
thank you.
I think.
I have one thing to add.
Okay.
I couldn't have made it without this wonderful person.
That's right. And that's why
And I
we had her
want the
sit
world
in
to
with
know.
you.
A Methodist and a Jew have lived together for almost 65 years.
That's great.
Yes.
Dr. Siegle, you ended out your service career as a major, and this was your part of your uniform. And can you tell me about the medals on this uniform, the
Well-
different insignias and so on?
This is the veterinary corps insignia. This is the major maple leaf. And these are the Pacific Service.
Service ribbons.
And I don't know what the, probably others, ribbons of just relating to service. I don't know whether that refers to years in the Army or regardless.
This is your uniform.
It was a pleasure to wear it. I tried it on for Nick initially, And you know, I thought I looked pretty good at it. But I can't get it close. I can hardly get it over my shoulders.
Well, you wore it proudly.
I did.
And thank you
I
again
did.
for your service.
The following oral military history project is a series of documentaries in association with the Lowell area men and women who proudly served and sacrificed part of their lives to preserve the opportunities for all of us to build our businesses and raise our families under a blanket of freedom. For reservations and more information, contact the Lowell Area Historical Museum at 616-897-7688.